So there was a quote that I came across again today. I've heard it any number of times, and I just attributed it to one of those things that sort of goes around spiritual circles, sort of almost a cliche in some ways. But the quote is, "What we are looking for is what's looking." Sounds like one of those, Zen, New Agey kind of things that, makes you sort of go, Anybody know where that came from originally?
Came from that.
She just learned that a few hours ago. So it was surprising. It was surprising to me. Saint Francis of Assisi. You didn't learn that in Catholic school. That's surprising, huh? What we are seeking, we discover, is that which is seeking itself, right? It's seeking as long as it believes that it's outside somewhere, and I'll find it, I'll discover it, I'll get the right set of beliefs all put together in the right order, it'll all make sense, I'll have the right really special spiritual experience that'll sort of end all desires for any other spiritual experience or worldly experience, right? Seeking on the outside. But all along, what that movement is what we eventually find. That sort of nudging us along, that desire, you could say, to find out what this life is really about, who we really are, however you phrase the question. That movement, that urge to find out, no, I really want to know. I really want to come out on a night that I could be doing other things and ponder the question, right? That movement is itself what is recognized as being what we actually are. The movement feels like it's, I want to find out there through an experience, through learning something, through adopting the right theology, through something, but outside, or the right set of thoughts, the right set of beliefs. But that whole movement, the origin of it, the impetus of it is our true self, you could say. Seeking itself, right? Not seeking a better version of who we are, the new and improved version. Just seeking its own beingness, you could say. That's why it's so hard to find, right? It's not that it's ever absent or distant or, being cagey. It's in plain sight all along, but it is what is looking. It's not looking out through our eyes, but actually that movement, that curiosity, that will to penetrate what this life is actually about. That urge, that movement, right? We think it's personal. We think, no, it's me. I decided to go on this spiritual quest. Right? I could have done other things, but I decided to do this. It was my decision, and that's what I'm doing. And I'm going to stick with it, right? That's the sense of it. But where did that urge come from? right? We take credit for it. We think, well, no, it was me. I decided that. But at some point we realize that this whole journey doesn't make, it feels like the only thing left to do, and at the same time doesn't make any sense at all. You know, it goes beyond where we can come up with logical reasons for, you know, I'm doing this, I'm on this journey because A, B, C, D. You know, this is what I'll get out of it. You know, we may tell ourselves that. I mean, life will use any devious trick it has to sort of push us along. But we find out after a while it's actually not personal. It comes from a much deeper place than that. It's really much more like life as a whole trying to recognize itself in spite of all of the distractions of this world. You know, all of the ways that this world has conditioned us to believe that this is how it works. This is who I am. This is how the world works. And we believe it. We're sort of pulled into that trance, all of us. And the trance is so powerful that 99.9% of the people never even question it. Never even question that they're actually living in a trance, in a set of beliefs that they haven't really examined, that they are separate from existence. It's just assumed. Just, no, I'm a separate self. I have to look out for myself. I have to, you know, earn my worth. I have to take care of myself. I can't really trust life too much, you know. Just me and the big world out there. It's how most people live their entire life. And living life that way, there's a certain anxiety about it. There's a certain draw to it. You know, there's there's pleasure down this road, happiness, joy, certainly. And so we pursue that. And we also find out, yes, and there can also be pain and suffering too. And so it's sort of, you get the whole spectrum of life until we get to the point of being willing to wonder if there's something more than that, something deeper than that. And that's actually a real turning point, like just to be willing to ask that question, to get to the point of saying, okay, everything I've learned up to this point was pushing me in this direction, career, relationship, family, community service, religion, ideologies, whatever, all been pushing that way. And at some point, we might just wonder, well, I wonder if that's the totality of life, or is there something else happening here? So just that willingness to ask that question is, it's actually a courageous act, right? You know? Just to ask the question, because you're introducing doubt into this whole structure that we've all been taught is the path to peace and happiness and love and respect and recognition and all the other things that we hope we're going to get. So even to question that, even to be willing to question it, very few people are willing to do. You know, they may sort of begin to sense it on the outskirts, you know, of their consciousness and have a solution for it. You know, go out to dinner, movie, a few glasses of wine. I mean, there's lots of choices, right? To just sort of pull you back from the edge. Not that any of those things are a problem, but at some point we can see that where the underlying motivation is for, they're just, if it's time for a little relaxation, and there's no harm. But if we're using that to prevent us from looking at what we suspect is actually there, then we might want to reconsider that one. But that's how it first comes in. It's sort of like a little disturbance out on the fringe that at first we can sort of ignore, and then after a while we can't really ignore it anymore. And then we sort of say, well, okay, maybe I'll take a look at that. Does that feel like that for anybody? We're sort of going along, life seems to be working, and then something happens where it just, it's time to reevaluate. So just being willing to ask that question, like, I wonder if there's something else, something I'm not seeing, something that's not generally presented as what this life is about. I wonder if there's something more there. Just to ask that question throws us into a whole different arena where everything that we've believed up to that point can be thrown into question. Like, I wonder if that's true. Anything that's unexamined, is what continues to operate through us. Byron Katie talks about karma as being an unexamined belief. Don't see it, don't look at it, get to do it over and over again until you're willing to actually see it. See what that conditioning, that mechanism is, how that functions in this body. Because when we really look at it, we're all conditioned. We have all been conditioned, thoroughly conditioned, right? Some useful, some not so useful. The useful conditioning is fine. The conditioning I'm talking about is the one that causes us grief, suffering. The kind of conditioning that doesn't really serve what we suspect may be true, suspect may be, how we would like to be in the world, how we would like to be with ourselves, be with other people. So that conditioning, it's not really possible to give up conditioning without looking at it first. You can't really just say, well, it's all conditioning, so I'll just be consciousness and forget about all of that. That's just trying to game the system, right? It's just trying to, just bypass all the difficult things to get to what we like. So we're back into the same game, I'm in it for the pleasure, my peace, my happiness, and I don't really want to do the heavy lifting. I just want to get to the realization. So it may happen that we realize what we really are and then come back for the conditioning. It can work that way too. It's actually easier. That makes sense? It's not actually necessary to sort of sort through all our conditioning before we recognize what we actually are. It's not necessary. And it's especially unhelpful if we have the belief that it is necessary to fix all the conditioning. In other words, I'm not worthy of waking up realizing my true nature until I fix these obvious defects in my life or my situation or my belief system or, my bad habits or whatever. If I have that belief, then, we've just built a wall of, I can't get to the other side of the wall until I climb over the wall. And see what I mean? That we've created the barrier as just by thinking that that's what I have to do. I have to clean up my act before I can actually realize who I am. When Jesus was gathering up his disciples, he would tell people, just come follow me, you know. He didn't say, clean up your act first and then let's talk, you know. He didn't say that. So there's also, it's also possible that some of the conditioning is so deep and causes so much suffering and so it's such a pull on our energy that it sort of robs us of a potential to look deeper. You know, that kind of suffering may need to get looked at first. You know, just to see that particular conditioning isn't true is helpful. And again, Byron Katie's work is really helpful that way, just to look at the consequences of believing something about myself or the other person or the world, and to question whether that's actually true. And if I believe that it is true, how does my life look? And how would my life look different if I didn't believe it? So that's the price we pay for any particular belief system. So if the conditioning is such that it just is consuming, like every day, it just sort of grips us, it's hard to focus on anything else, then it may be necessary to look at that first, just to free up enough time and energy to look at something deeper. It's sort of like if you're in a position, let's say in some remote part of the world where you're starving, it's probably best to find food first and then think about, your true self after you've had enough to eat that you're not going to die in the meantime. So if the conditioning is such that it just causes you to consume so much energy every day that there's nothing left, then that may need to be looked at. But what I'm saying is except for that, if it's just a normal amount of dysfunctional conditioning, just the normal amount of, then it's not necessary to work through all of it before really seeing who we are. Once we recognize that what we are is already complete, is already present, then it's much easier to look at whatever conditioning remains after that point, because it just doesn't feel so personal anymore. So, it's a bit of a miracle, isn't it? We never question it. We just assume that this is how life is, right? And as you're saying, through a sequence of some events, suddenly we're willing to ask the question, we have an interest, we're willing to look deeper. That's pretty miraculous, isn't it? It's not like, we've sort of gradually thought our way out of the trance. It's like something happened that disturbed the trance enough that we were thinking, maybe sort of like not all that much different from being like literally asleep at night, and there's sort of a disturbing noise. Like last night, it was thunder and lightning at 4 o'clock in the morning. It sort of like jolts you awake. It's not a lullaby that generally wakes you up. Life will use whatever it needs to lose. It's not that grace is ever absent. We're the ones that are absent. We're so entranced by, life. It's so interesting. So many things happening. So much drama. So many things to think about, figure out, worry about, be anxious about, regret, hope, all of that keeps us thoroughly entranced. So, but we, at some point we can begin to see that there's, all of those experiences have a different flavor to them, but they still have something in common. There's an experience, and there's something here that experiences it, right? So without that, whatever it is that's here, noticing whatever the experience is, without that screen of awareness, whatever we want to call it, without that, there's no experience, right? So in that sense, all experiences have that in common. It requires somebody, namely you, to experience it. So in a very real sense, we can say that the entire world happens within you. In a very real sense. Because without your presence, without your consciousness, all of us, without that consciousness, well, we wouldn't know the world existed or didn't. And we're entirely dependent on this sensory organism to register whatever it is that's happening. So as long as we're entranced in what's appearing on that screen, then the focus is out. But as soon as we sort of turn it around and say, well, I wonder what that screen of awareness is. I mean, it seems like it's here, it's close to home. I wonder if that's actually what I am. We're not denying that the experience is happening. We're not saying, well, it's all a dream, or, don't have to try to philosophize about that. But we can say that it is registered here within consciousness, whatever this consciousness is aware of. So we can just, it's very similar to the exercise that we did at first around silence, right? Lots of noise out here, and then silence. Consciousness is silent already. We don't have to improve it to make it silent. So it's silent, it's receptive, it's present, non-judgmental, just present. And then there's, the vibration, the noise, the arisings, the manifestations. We've been taught from birth that that's what's fascinating. The manifested world, that's what's fascinating. This, consciousness, everybody has it, how special could it be? So we ignore it, we take it for granted, we don't look into it. But it is the road where freedom actually lies. If let's just take a feeling, like a feeling that we don't particularly like, sort of a disturbing feeling. There's a point where the feeling's not there, we're feeling pretty good, and then, a memory comes up and this disturbing feeling sort of enters my consciousness, right? And then I think, now I'm thinking about that again, right? So there's something that notices that it wasn't there, and then it is there, right? If there was nothing that noticed that, you wouldn't notice that it wasn't there and now it is. I mean, you sort of notice it sort of descending, right? And then, maybe sometime later, some hours later, maybe just I haven't been thinking about that for the last hour or so. It's not there anymore. So we notice the arising, We notice when it's there. We notice after it passes away. Very much like the silence that we were talking about before, where silence, sound drops back into silence. So without that awareness, we wouldn't be able to say, oh, that feeling wasn't there, but now it is. We wouldn't be able to say that. And without the awareness, we couldn't say, that feeling isn't there anymore, but it was a few hours ago. So we can notice that coming and going. And that noticing is that awareness. So when we started out talking about what we are seeking is what is doing the seeking already, right? So that movement arises out of that silence, out of that deeper nature that sort of propels us for mysterious reasons. I mean, we can assign reasons to it, but it's not really to our advantage. Everybody get that? We think it is, we think, well, I'll be much happier and more peaceful and everything. There may be more peace and there may be more joy. That's true. The only difference is you'll lose the possibility of thinking of yourself as the person who is happy. That's what you lose. So there's actually nothing in it for you. It's that sense of being a separate, independent self is what's lost. It's just a false construct, so it's nothing serious, but it can feel serious. It's just a false idea is what we end up giving up. But it feels like that separate self is what is seeking, right? I am going to I'm going to improve myself, improve my life, get enlightened, then things will be really good for me. That's the game. I mean, that's the lure that life uses to pull you forward until it's way too late, and then you realize that you're in over your head, and there's no payoff for you at all. But it's that sense of separate self that is what causes us to sort of fluctuate between sort of anxiousness about, something that might happen, or fear, or hope, or, just all those movements where we're trying to negotiate with life somehow, trying to, hope it turns out better for us. But it's all founded on a basic distrust that, I know what should be happening. I know what's best for me. I know how I want life to look. But, like we were talking about before, the things that actually cause us to make significant transformations are actually almost always things that we wouldn't choose to do. Right? And we may not want to even do them again. But we also don't regret them either. We just see it as a necessary occurrence to, cause us to look at life more deeply, more compassionately, more care for other people, more gentleness with ourselves. Sort of a maturing process. Which is a different movement altogether than this, egoic, I'm in it for me kind of stance. Where everything is measured by, is this a benefit to me or not? Is this person that I've just met, is there any benefit to me, that may result from this possible friendship? Is there, when life is seen as, a constant strategy about how to position myself as a separate self in relation to life, how life shows up, has a much different feeling than recognizing that it is all one existence, awareness appearing here looking like this, appearing there looking like that. And it doesn't mean that we have to like every appearance, but we can appreciate every appearance, right? Appearance for being exactly what it is. And knowing, being able to participate in the world and knowing at the same time that it's all appearing as the next experience within awareness. All of it. It's very easy to turn something like that into a philosophy that, again, separates us from the world. Right? Because we can say, oh, it's all just experience anyway, and I'm awareness, and you feel that, how it's just sort of retracting ourselves from the world. If we use it as a belief system, but if it's actually our direct experience that's actually what's happening, that life is manifesting here, looking like this, manifesting there, looking like that. The connection is actually through that wholeness, through that oneness. And then we're free to engage, we're free to enjoy, we're free to experience it. We don't have to separate ourselves from it. We don't have to protect ourselves from it. Don't have to run away from it. So it actually liberates us to live wholeheartedly. If we turn it into a philosophy, it separates us. If it's actually our direct experience, we get to live life from that wholeness. Big difference. So this deeper urge that we started talking about, what is seeking itself, it's helpful to know that that's already present, that movement that we can take as a personal, almost personal will. It's possible to recognize as that's something that's coming from a much deeper place. The analogy that's often used is, the individual wave on the ocean, could feel like, self-identify as, I'm a big wave, or I'm a little wave, or, still a part of the ocean, right? It's just, the difference is just appearance, temporary appearance. When we see that that's actually the case, not as a philosophy, not as a religion, but it's actually the fact of it, then how we interact with other people, how we see ourselves being in the world, all of that changes. Because it doesn't feel so personal. So what we give up is this false sense of separation, where we give up the idea, I'm separate, but I'm trying to figure out how to get whole. But the idea of feeling separate, it's an idea, right? It's just an idea that we've become convinced of that we haven't yet questioned until we do. I wonder if that's actually true, that I'm actually separate from the rest of life. Is that the deepest truth, or is there something more than that? When we really begin to look at that, to recognize that actually, even physiologically, even ecologically, we're not separate from the rest of life. When we see the implications of that, it changes the whole game. Then this sense of being separate, apart, how do I get whole? The question of how do I get whole is based on the belief in separation. So the whole idea of how do I get rid of this sense of separation, it's like, well, how do I get rid of a false belief? Try really hard. I'm going to get rid of this. If it's seen as false, you don't have to try to get rid of it, right? If you're walking down a path at dusk and something wiggles on the road and oh my gosh, it's a snake, and then there was like, no, I just stepped on this branch. The question doesn't remain, how do I get rid of the snake, right? You just see, well, it wasn't true. It's just a false belief. It's not like I'm really going to try to get rid of that. It's just seeing, well, it wasn't true to begin with. So, that's where this whole practice of inquiry, is that belief that's holding the sense of separation in place. Is that actually true? What am I basing that on? What it's based on is this sense that what I am is this package of beliefs and ideas and memories and history and hopes and opinions and that whole conglomerate thing that we take to be who we are. But you separate each one of those like an opinion. Well, is the opinion always been there? Or is it, did you have it when you were 2 years old and still have it today? Or, has it evolved and you've adopted new ones and given up old ones? In other words, it's not permanent, right? We didn't always have this sense of being separate from the world. As little kids, we didn't have that. We were just out to play in the yard. We didn't think wasn't like, oh, I'm going to get my separate self out of bed and go play in the backyard. We're not, it didn't even occur to us. We're just enjoying life, and participating. So all of those things are things that have been adopted along the way, and we've taken them on, as saying, well, that's who I am. Any beliefs that we have about ourselves, our shortcomings, that they shouldn't be. But we take all that, what we think about what's happening takes on a greater reality than whatever it is that actually is happening. Right? Not so much what somebody actually said or what somebody actually did. It's what we think about what they did. That's where the reality is. So that whole belief structure where, I know I'm in a position to evaluate what should and shouldn't happen, how the world should or shouldn't be. I know what I am. It's this set of beliefs. And if I give that up, the world would just fall apart. But again, it's just our way of trying to manage what's happening, how to feel safe, how to feel like we're in control, how to think we're maneuvering for our own benefit. That whole strategic approach to life. So what would it feel like if we just allowed life to sort of inform us a little more trusting of life, a little less a little less the whole movement to improve, to strive to make better. I mean, that's okay up to a point, but at some point it's based on a dissatisfaction with whatever's present. So a different movement is, at this moment, without changing anything, with still the same old habits, same situations, same dramas happening in my life, can I recognize something that is not subject to all of those comings and goings? Because all of those things are subject to change one day, maybe sooner, maybe later, but all subject to change. All the circumstances, all the belief systems, all the experiences, all the everything. So the question is there anything that's not subject to that? What is it that recognizes that your experience now is, we can see it, we can recognize it, and then it's life saying, almost like saying, how about now? How about with this happening? Can you still see it? How about now? And we can experience that in small ways, right? Like you're walking down the street and, there's traffic or there's, somebody playing music or somebody talking. Can there still be that recognition of, yes, I'm present, I'm alive, there's awareness here. And it becomes more and more natural over time. And like you say, sometimes something will come out of one's mouth and then it recognize, oh, that's a little off. Or, oh, that was surprising, that just came from someplace deeper, it didn't come out of me trying to say the right thing or not. It just came from a deeper place. So we can say, oh, that's interesting. It's just like you're saying, becoming more and more aware, more and more of the time, noticing that awareness is already present without having to manufacture it. Notice that it's sometimes moves in surprising ways, and that'll just continue to happen more and more frequently with more and more stability, you could say. It's good. It's really helpful to know that there's nothing. Any sense of permanence is an idea, right? So any sense of, oh, I've attained this, and so therefore I'll never be judgmental again. And then you find a judgmental thought come up. What do you do with that? It's much better to not form opinions about, where I'm at in the process, that I'm beyond judgment. I would say, for all of us, we don't know what contractive thought may arise next. It may be some pattern, who knows, some rage may arise. It's like, wow, I thought I was way more spiritual than that. And what can get people in trouble is that they pretend that didn't happen. So then they have to cover it up, and then you've got this little secret hidden in the closet, and it gets bigger, right? So it's much better to just say, at this moment, anger's not present, but I can't make any statements that it will never arise again. Which is true, right? This is about being true. So yeah, it's because we don't know what. So a lot of times, things that we thought may have been, seen through, resolved, and they may have at a certain level, and then sometimes they need to be seen again at a more subtle level. And you think, I thought I dealt with that 10 years ago, and here's it arising again. And we get an opportunity to look at it again at a more subtle level, and then maybe a more subtle level. There's no end to this. The recognition can be the end of seeking, that huge relief, right? Recognition of awareness, presence, huge relief. And then that recognition to penetrate the conditioning of this body-mind doesn't appear to have an end. There's always more and more to see. So it's not this, a lot of times this point of awakening is talked about as a, before and after one-time event, and it can feel like that for a while, and then we can be surprised at what is still comes up to be seen after that. Because that event can be powerful enough to blow out quite a bit of conditioning, sometimes not so much. Sometimes, it's just a much more quiet transition, but there's almost always more and more to be seen afterwards. So the belief that, it'll all be, peace and happiness and clarity and ease, and that's actually not true. Yeah. Well, it's good to know, right? Because otherwise you think, well, then, was that real? Did I actually have that experience? If we believe that it should look like this and doesn't, then that's just, it's just false advertising. But it doesn't mean that the recognition isn't full and complete, because there can, one of the real measures of a genuine shift is that sense of lack, that sense of I'm not somehow enough, but I know there must be something more. That movement ceases. What actually is happening is the seeker feels like it's seeking, the seeker finds, but what it finds is that there was never a seeker to start with. It's the seeker that disappears along with the seeking. So it's not the seeker finding, right? Oh, now I know what's true. It can feel a little bit like that for a while, but that's just the ego talking. It's actually that movement discovers that the movement is what it is. It is who we are. So we haven't become something that we're not. We've recognized what we are. So in that sense, there's nowhere to go, because we're recognizing what was always already there, always already complete. That's the fullness of it. Complete in the sense of that's what I am, and yet there's still, for this body-mind to realize, there's still more to be seen. Doesn't mean that what's seen isn't true, it just means that there's more to be seen. There's a lovely phrase, Adia uses it, and I'm not sure whether that's the origin of it or not, but the phrase is always being, always becoming. So it's actually both. It's the beingness is complete, right? The recognition that that's what I am, this spacious awareness that in which everything happens, always being, and yet there's a sense of always becoming at the same time. This always more to be seen through this body-mind, through this conditioning. So you notice that I struggle to describe it also, right? You know, it's because it's not something that we can stand back from and look at like everything else. You know, like we can even stand back and look at a thought and, you know, describe to somebody else what we're thinking or feeling, right? Or seeing or hearing. I mean, we can make some attempt to describe that. Consciousness is different in that it is always prior to whatever it is that we're looking at. So the effort to try to understand what it is from our mind, trying to look at consciousness, which it will try to do. It's just not capable of grasping what it is. It's possible, like you say, to experience it, like, okay, there's that sense of awareness now, consciousness now, but when we try to understand it, it's like our mind trying to look back at it. And the mind thinks in words and concepts, and, you know, so it's trying to put this awareness or consciousness into a framework that it feels comfortable with, and it just frustrates it because it can't do that. So the other part of your question is about how do I know that it's not a function of the mind? It's just those kind of questions aren't questions that whatever answer that we can come up with isn't going to be satisfactory, because any attempt to answer that question is again coming from the mind. So all we can do is to leave it, to pose it as a question and leave it. And that the question is actually what does the work. So the question could just be something as simple as, I wonder if consciousness is prior to thought. I wonder if it's something that's not being generated by this body-mind. I wonder if that's true. And just leave the question, rather than trying to answer the question with the mind. You know, I heard so-and-so said that, you know, that's true. That's not actually that helpful. The only helpfulness of it is to just raise the question, I wonder if that's possible. But what's important is to give ourselves the time to actually ponder that question ourselves, to just let it deepen, you know, which feels more solid in a way. This thought that changes moment to moment, or something that's always present that is there for the next thought and the next thought and the next thought. And it might, you know, that sense of where our identity is, can feel like, you know, we're thinking about consciousness, and sometimes we're there in consciousness, and there's this back and forth movement. And at some point, that identity shifts to awareness, that there's no explanation is sufficient, but it's self-affirming, that there's no any question that that's not any question about our identity is no longer there. That is lost. Not because we've changed our belief about it one day and then the next day not so sure and back and forth, but at some point when we've allowed that question to really percolate, you know, really be of interest to us, really allow that to seep into us, you know, over time. My experience was that it was sort of an erosional process. Wasn't like a wake up one day to the next, like, oh, you know, There can be, it's an odd thing. It can be that I know what I am as this awareness, and yet my identity is still parked over here in this thinking mind, separate self body. And I know that's true, but somehow I'm still parked over here. That's sort of an odd thing. And for myself, it was probably several years where that belief in a separate self became just more and more flimsy to the point that I just couldn't believe it anymore. And that identity was is from consciousness. So looking back at body, mind, so it changed over time. But it's not something, it doesn't appear to be something that is a momentary realization. We can know that it's true, and yet for it to really seep in through this body-mind, where the body-mind knows it, it can take some time. So, but I just hold it as a question, not try to answer with the mind, just wonder like, well, I wonder if that's actually not just a place that I can visit, but it's actually what I fundamentally am. We can, call it consciousness, we can call it awareness, some traditions, they could call it spirit. Obviously the name doesn't matter, but the actual direct experience of it is what counts. So, yeah, the more time you can just spend there, just check in, like, wonder if it's there now, just it becomes the more we become familiar with it, the more we can sort of rely on its presence, the more solid it seems to be. Always being, always becoming. It's really helpful to see, or at least allow the possibility that this movement of looking, seeking, trying to understand life at a deeper level is coming from a place that's beyond personal will.